Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Overruled with Katie Z. I'm Katie Z. If you're new here, nice to meet you. I have a very special guest with me today. His name is Jesse. Let's bring him on. Hi, Jesse. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. Forgot to turn my light on. That's part of my charm, I'm told. I forget to hit the right buttons in the right order. Lights on
I
now.
I can relate.
So I emailed you last week, a couple weeks ago, maybe, and I said, "Hey, do you want to be on my podcast?" And you said yes. And the reason why I wanted to bring you on is because I saw some of your shorts on YouTube, and I know YouTube is not your main social media. TikTok is, but your story was so interesting to me. So let me just tell the people real quick. You were in prison from the time you were 18 until just a couple years ago.
Yeah, until August 16th of 2021.
August 16th. You did some stuff back then, which I can relate to. We talked a little bit before the show. And one of the things was that you you found drugs, basically. Do you want to just tell us a little bit about your path starting, when you started doing bad stuff?
Yeah, I don't think there was any ill intent, and I actually found a lot of people in prison who had the same story. We
Mhm.
weren't out to cause harm or out to do something wrong. We were actually in search of a solution.
Yeah.
So I had like crippling social anxiety and depression and all these kind of mental health issues, and I didn't have people in my life that were modeling healthy coping or healthy behavior. So I found whatever I could to deal with those issues. So for me, I remember the first time I had a drink or the first time I smoked pot, I was like, wow, the world is bigger than I thought it was. This is taking away that pain. This is taking
Yeah.
away that fear. And then it expanded. And I don't think that was the end. That was me kind of like casually, that was like Advil, right? Like you have an ache in your back, you take some Advil.
Mhm.
But then I found cocaine, and it felt like the absolute answer to my most fundamental questions. And that was the beginning of the end, because once I found that, I didn't have room in my brain for there being any alternative or for
Yeah.
there being any other option. It felt like this is it. This is the answer. My whole life I've been looking for the answer. Now, how can I consume enough of this answer to no longer hear that pain?
Without dying.
Yeah. At that
Although
point,
my answer was heroin, not cocaine. So, but I totally understand that when you're in that state, there's nothing else matters. You just have to have that feeling. You just keep chasing that feeling.
oh, 100%. And it's ironic. I never shot heroin. I never did heroin until I went to prison. Like that's the kind of healing environment we have behind the walls.
Wow.
But cocaine for me felt like life, and heroin felt like death. It felt like,
Mhm.
hey, I'm hurting so bad. I just need to die a while. Can we just like make this go away?
Yeah.
And one of the things I'm really grateful for is that it was not something that I connected to. It was kind of like that actually was a temporary coping thing for me. The
Mhm.
same way somebody goes and like goes to the gym or has a drink after a bad day. That's what heroin was for me. But cocaine was like the lifeblood. It was like that. I need my Starbucks shot 7 times a day, or I won't be able to make it through the day. And that was the reason that once I got locked up, I never did it again.
Yeah. I wonder why. I know I have an addictive personality, but why can't I get addicted to going to the gym? I've tried. It just does not work. Um, so in your pursuit of cocaine, you committed some crimes that you admit to, which I love. I hate people who make excuses for their actions. I really think highly of people who can say, yes, I messed up. Here's what I did wrong. And here's what I'm doing to fix my mistakes. But it was a home invasion or a robbery or something like that. Is that correct?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, so there was a home invasion and there was a shooting. There were two separate entities.
Was it within days of each other, or was it okay? So it was like
Right.
one right after the other.
Yeah. So the robbery wasn't intended to be a robbery, but
Mhm.
we still did it. I had this group of guys. I had 3 co-defendants. One who was a kid I'd gone to high school with, and 2 who were undocumented immigrants who were kind of part of this like built family we found. We used to say,
Mhm.
"Somos como hermanos," like we're like brothers, like we were this brotherhood. Because I think we were really looking for a sense of family. Because for whatever reason, we didn't feel that. Like we hadn't felt that in our lives, and that's what we were seeking. So we were looking for any excuse to go out and do fun things or have experiences. But the reality is every experience revolved around how are we going to get more cocaine.
Yeah.
And we ran out of money, and we had burned every bridge, and nobody would front us anymore. It was a matter of like this is an emergency. Like how are we going to survive the day?
Yeah.
Because when you start doing cocaine, it starts feeling like air, and you would do anything to get more air. Like if you're drowning, the person who's trying to save you, you'll push them down to pull yourself up without even thinking.
Mhm.
And so we kind of turned into these feral versions of ourselves. And one of the guys had worked at this restaurant and said, "Oh, these terrible people! They only hire undocumented immigrants, and they treat us really badly, and they don't pay us very well, and they take all the tips and just like lock them in a safe somewhere." And we'd actually gone out to that restaurant, and I didn't experience that at all. Everybody seemed really nice and thoughtful, but in my mind, I was like, "Oh yeah, these must be bad people. Like he must be right."
Yeah.
Break into the house and steal the safe or steal all the money that was in the closet and leave. The problem was when we showed up, there were people there, so we left. And when we came back, all the cars were gone, so we thought it was going to be empty. But while Juan and I went in downstairs, Dan went to the front door, and in my mind, Dan was going to like knock on the door, and if anybody answered, like run away or be like, "Oh, I'm sorry, I'm selling insurance."
Wrong house.
Instead,
Yeah, something.
he pulled his gun out and stuck it in the maid's face, and this breaking and entering escalated quickly to a robbery. And it was a home invasion. We broke into this home and we took stuff, and there was no bag of money. There was no safe, or at least not that we found. And instead, what we did was ransack this house and terrorize his family and terrorize his maid for half a bottle of liquor and a digital camera and a couple, like, I don't know, bracelets that probably weren't real.
Mhm.
It was the most disorganized, destructive, like just horrible plan in the world, because it wasn't really a plan. It was just, again, this like feral animals kind of ransacking a space.
Yeah. That it stinks to have to look back at like things that you are not proud of in your past. And it sounds horrible. You know what I mean? It sounds horrible to look back at something like that and realize, and it sounds like you weren't even the one with the gun. So how did you end up getting 19, or you were sentenced to actually 32 years? Served 19 of it? Yeah.
The robbery was the first part. Then separate from that was a shooting. That was a few days later. We had actually found somebody who would front us more cocaine. Like if we had not done the robbery in the first place, we would have found somebody to front us more cocaine. It's amazing how optimistic, drug dealers are. We found it. So we were kind of partying again because we finally had a connection again. And one of the guys had gotten a phone call and was freaking out. And he was panicking because his pregnant girlfriend was at home, and these two guys were at their house or their trailer and would not leave them alone. And the backstory is, this is a guy who sold me the gun that I had, and he had bought it from these two guys, and then they had wanted it back. And I don't know if heroin was the same way, but with cocaine, I experienced this profound paranoia. Like everyone was out to get me. I always had to watch my back. And in reality, there were a lot of violent acts and robberies and things happening. Like it made sense to be paranoid to some degree, but in my mind, it was kind of blown out of proportion. So I carried this gun everywhere. I slept with it. It was in my truck. It was in my, like, I always had it. So when they wanted the gun back, I was like, "You got to be kidding me. Like, I'm not giving this back. Like you're trying to like take my gun so you can then rob me or so you can then hurt me." Anyways, they were at his house because they were basically threatening her and saying, "You're going to bring us this gun or else. Like, you're going to bring us some money, you're going to bring us a gun, or you're going to bring us cocaine." That in my mind was where I got angry, because if they had just said, "We need the gun or else there are going to be problems, like we're going to get in trouble," that would have been one thing. But when you're willing to accept cocaine as payment, this isn't about the gun. This is about you doing a power play. And so having been the villain in this story, of having broken into this home, having done all these things and disappointed all these people, I was like, no, I get to be the hero now. I get to tell them, like, you're wrong and you don't get to do this. So I got on the phone and we yelled back and forth at each other and we threatened each other and we agreed to meet. And on the way out there, like in my mind, initially I was pumped up and I had all these guys behind me telling me like, "Yeah, you get to be the hero. Like you're saving the day." And then as I got there closer and closer, I realized this is a terrible idea. Like somebody's going to get hurt or somebody's going to die.
Yeah.
And I pulled into the parking lot and I got out. It was a Food Line parking lot. And I got out to go and buy a pack of cigarettes. And this is how just drugged out of my mind was. It was like 2 a.m. The Food Line was not open. Like you're not buying cigarettes. So as I got back to the truck, they pulled up and they got out of their car and they like approached me very aggressively. And this voice, it was like, "Hey, this is not a good idea." I got back in my car. I was scared. I got my car. I locked the doors and I drove away. And they started chasing me. And so there was this fear. But there's also this anger, like, how dare you chase me? Like, I'm trying to leave. I'm trying to do the right thing. Now, realistically, I created this situation. I got on the phone and argued. I put myself there. But in that space, I felt sorry for myself and I felt angry and I felt justified. So when they drove up in the passing lane and were like swerving and like I'm going over the outside line and wondering if I'm going to get run off the road, or I'm worried about what they're doing. And when the passenger reached around behind them to grab something, I just, in fear and in anger and just in overwhelming rage, like grabbed the gun out of my belt and just opened fire. Didn't know what happened. Didn't know if they were alive, if they were dead. They just, I saw the car suddenly not in my peripheral, but I was deaf from the gunshots. I couldn't hear anything. And I looked back and I saw they were kind of like jackknifed across the road. I have like tears in my eyes and I have this like pressure in my ears and I don't know what's going on.
Shooting a gun in close quarters like that really does a number on your
They
it shakes you inside.
I feel like Hollywood really lied to me. Like I should have had a like good like line and I should have felt good about it. No,
Yeah.
I was like streaming tears and
Hmm.
shaking and losing my mind and then drove back home and the next morning basically the SWAT team got us.
So they just knew it was you. Like, did somebody rat you out or?
Well, the two guys both lived, which I'm really grateful for,
Yeah.
and gave a description of me, which was kind of hard. Like I was kind of a douchebag, like
Yeah.
white male with long hair and a cowboy hat, driving a truck with a silver pistol. Like it was
Hmm.
kind of hard to miss. Like
Yeah.
especially since I think they were looking for us for the robbery. They really weren't sure who we were, but I guess
Hmm.
that when they started looking at registrations, like okay, these are our 20 suspects. Only one of them owns a Chevy S10. Like we're
Okay.
probably going to get them.
Yeah. Now you mentioned about wanting to feel a sense of family. Did you have? I hear a lot of people say when they have an addiction that they had a bad childhood and their parents weren't there, which is not the case in my case at all. I was just dumb and liked drugs. I had a great family. My mom's actually watching right now. Hi, Mom. Um, and I had a great upbringing. And I think I was just sort of depressed after my father's passing, and all this stuff happened. But I don't use that as an excuse. I did things because I was dumb and I liked drugs. Did you have a good upbringing, or was it difficult upbringing?
That's a really interesting question, and I'm kind of rehashing that or exploring that in therapy now. Because if
Okay.
you'd asked me 2 years ago, I'd been like, yeah, I had a great childhood. Everything
Yeah.
was wonderful. And now after finally, I mean, I've been in therapy for 25 years. After
Mhm.
finding a really good therapist and after kind of delving into things, I'm like, maybe things weren't all so great. Like maybe not everybody's dad tells them gangster stories about like getting away with murder and getting away with robberies and
Okay.
maybe that's not normal. And maybe their moms don't put their dads in the hospital when they get divorced or like trash bike shops or go completely crazy. But for the longest time, I think it was exactly what you said. I felt like I didn't want to make an excuse. I didn't want to
Mhm.
say, oh, well, this is why I did it. So I just took it on myself. I said, no, I made a bunch of bad decisions and I screwed up. But looking back, I had some trauma and I
Yeah.
had some challenges and I didn't have a lot of role models. So I think that it was a natural response of looking for what I hadn't found.
Mhm.
And both my parents got sober when I was very young and did their absolute best and did turn their lives around to a large degree. That didn't mean that they necessarily gave me what I needed, or that as a child I had everything I needed to feel safe or feel secure or feel confident in the world. And again, it's still kind of like a Rubik's Cube I'm trying to put into place because I don't really know. And I have huge chunks of my childhood that I just don't have any memory of. So
Yeah.
the
Okay.
answer is I don't know.
Okay. Hopefully you'll figure it out in therapy. Maybe I need to go get therapy too. I'm not sure. I don't think I've ever been in like real therapy besides like NA and stuff like, like that sort of stuff. Did you have any treatment and some of these answers I already know, but but did you have any treatment in prison for the drug addictions or you said you've been in therapy for 25 years, so you've had therapy in prison.
Yeah, so that was, well, I'll address the therapy part first
Yeah.
because I think that's really important. I was really lucky. There's a huge stigma against mental health treatment in prison. People say, oh, don't go over there. They'll label you. They'll put something in your file. They'll whatever. I didn't like, I was at such a low point in my life. I was desperately clawing for any help I could get. I didn't care what anybody else thought of me or what it looked like or what they would put in my file. I was going to get help.
Hmm.
So that helped. I also additionally, had family support and community people. And so I had a psychologist that I reached out to and talked to on the phone every week for 12 years.
Oh, that's
And that
great.
wasn't that I paid him. He was just like, hey, I'm a family friend. I want you to be okay. I want to support you. So
Yeah.
there was a different kind of experience. That being said, as far as treatment, I remember like the first person I was at, there were no 12-step programs. There were no
Mhm.
drug treatment programs. They tried to take my good time and make me spend more time in prison for not taking me an anger management class that they did not offer.
Wow.
That was the kind of mentality. Now, thankfully, when I got to Buckingham, there were 12-step programs, there were treatment programs,
Mhm.
but the problem was they have this classification system. It's called Chorus. It's essentially a personality test, and it determines your level of damage, for lack of a better word, and what you need. And I was a level 0 for everything, for recidivism, for violence, for everything. But for substance abuse, I was a level 10.
Mhm.
And therefore, I was too high to be eligible for substance abuse treatment that wasn't intensive or inpatient. So I wasn't
Oh.
eligible to get substance abuse treatment until I could go to Indian Creek, which was an inpatient facility. But I couldn't go to Indian Creek until I was 1.5 years from the gate. So for 30 years, I had to spend time in prison. And then after that 30 years, I could get inpatient treatment. And to actually go to those facilities, they're horrible. They are the most drug-ridden, gang-run, like horrible facilities there are, because that's what they are in name. But in reality, it's a disaster.
My aunt, who passed away last year, used to go to a prison in her area. She lived in Sarasota, Florida. And there's a prison somewhere near her house that she would go every week. And I guess in order to have an AA or NA meeting, they have to have somebody from the outside there. And she did that for years and years and years, up until a couple of weeks before she passed, actually. She was still doing that, and she would tell me stories about how important it was for these men to have somebody to talk to that was not, that understood their, where they're coming from. But she also said that there wasn't an actual, like, besides the NA meetings, once a week or whatever, that was it, so it seems like a lot of the crime and criminals, that are in prison have substance abuse problems. And it would be really great if we can get some sort of treatment programs set up inside the prisons, I think. And let me throw this up on the screen, actually. Hold on. You started hold on a second. I have to do it a different way. I never pressed all the right buttons in the correct order, by the way. It just never happens.
At this point, it's a skill.
It is. Perfecting. I'm practicing, but when I started looking into you, when I knew you were coming on the show, I saw that you have the Second Chancer Foundation, and I love this. So you're basically, I don't know what's happening. There, now we're scrolling. It says here, excuse me, our mission. Each year in America, more than 600,000 people are released from state and federal prisons. Millions serve shorter periods in local jails. After release, they return to incarceration at one of the highest rates in the world. So we're talking about recidivism here. So you're basically trying to help people who are getting out start a life on the outside. And we talked a smidge before the show, and I was saying how my friend Justin, by the way, I never miss an opportunity to promote myself. So Justin was actually in prison. If you want to watch that episode, it's a few back. His name is Justin Coleman. It's a couple months ago. So look back at my live streams and find that one. It's a very good conversation that I had with him. But he was saying how he thinks of himself as three different people: the person he was before he committed any crimes, and then he didn't have a long history, or not that you had a long history, but a history of being a criminal. He committed one crime one day and then went to prison for 14 years. And then his life after. And you're trying to take that life after and make it an actual life after, instead of just going back into the system. Because when people can't get a job and can't support themselves, they go right back to committing crimes, and it's just really not good for society or them. Do you want to tell us a little bit about why you I mean, it's kind of obvious why you decided to start this, but do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So I got out and had no idea, because that's the other thing about my release. I was sentenced to serve 32 years in prison. Mm-hmm. At 16 years, at 16 and a half years, I started putting together a clemency petition, or a petition for conditional pardon, essentially saying I am guilty of all these charges. But my original sentencing guidelines called for from 8 to 13 years, and then the modified called for from 10 to 16 years. And I've now been in prison for the entirety of that time, for the high point of the guidelines.
Okay.
So I basically said, hey, I'm like throwing myself on the mercy of the governor and hoping that they will consider my release. And about 2.5 years later, I was released with an hour and a half's notice. So I went from having 10 years left of my sentence, including good time, to walking out the gate with an hour and a half's notice. So I had no plans in place. I had no idea what I was doing. I'd spent all those years preparing. I mean, I'd read every self-help book. I was in therapy. I was learning trades. I was getting a college education. I was preparing, but in the immediate, I had no plans.
Yeah.
So I was like, well, what am I going to do? And somebody encouraged me to start posting videos on social media. I had a then girlfriend who was absolutely amazing and supportive. And she had actually helped me while I was incarcerated start a podcast where we were just recording phone calls essentially and posting them online. And she said, Jesse, people are going to be interested in your story and your perspective because it's unique. And so I started making videos, and I remember the first video that I made on social media went viral, and then the next one, and I had these kind of responses from people that I realized were significant. And one of those responses actually came at a party where I was just in the right place at the right time.
Mhm.
And this guy came over and said, "Hey, tell me your story. Like, I hear you have an interesting one." And I broke my story down, and he said, "Oh, that is interesting." He said, "So social media is really kind of a big interest of mine. I'd love to know more." We talked for probably an hour and a half, had a great conversation, but I didn't think anything of it. The next morning I woke up and I had told him that I was applying. I was on like third or fourth round of interviews for this big national nonprofit. I was going to get into prison advocacy. I was going to make a difference. He sent me an email and said, "I don't want you to take that job. And this is not an empty thing. I am going to give you the money to fund a 501c3 for the next several years if you like listen to your gut and listen to me and start your own nonprofit." And I thought this was crazy. And like I had worked, doing kind of like carpentry and little other things. And I was like, I can't start a nonprofit. I don't know what I'm doing.
Yeah.
But what he said is, what you're doing is making a difference. Like it made a difference to me and it'll make a difference to somebody else. So then I realized like this is a great opportunity to have an impact on people's lives. And we've tried out a number of different iterations to figure out where we can be most effective. So we've done reentry classes through the UVA Equity Center. We're working with people out leaving long-term incarceration. I go into the jail and the juvenile center. I do
What
direct
does
service work.
what does a reentry class look like? What are you teaching these men?
Sure.
And women? I mean, I don't know if you teach women too, but I don't want to leave them out if you do.
I would love to. At this point, we don't have a returning female population that
Okay.
we can really justify having a separate class for. But
Gotcha.
yeah, we would love to at some point. So essentially, we're teaching life skills, very simple things about like communication and relationships and professionalism and being a parent. And essentially, we had a really well-rounded program by a guy who spent 27 years in prison. And the reason we worked with him is because he was the lost cause. He was the guy that everybody in the jail and everybody in the prison said will never get out, will never make anything of himself, will never be anything but a criminal, and is now out in the world leading a violence interruption unit, designing reentry programs, having a significant impact. So he said, what made the difference to you? Like what allowed you to become the person you are? And he essentially broke down the lessons that he had learned in prison and the people he had learned from, and then put all that together into a curriculum that I thought was really effective. Like it was excellent for the adult population. But what we found is, I won't get into too much detail, like we struggled to get people into class because people struggled with transportation. Even we could pick up the people in the city, we can't drive, an hour outside of the city every direction to get people. And so the infrastructure and the basis was really a struggle. So what we're doing now, we have a big fundraising event next month. We have a proposal to create a mentor network for people who are still incarcerated, as well as those who've recently returned. And we want to work with businesses all the way from your local mom and pop business up to Fortune 50 companies that are willing to give time and expertise so that people can learn financial literacy and entrepreneurship skills and professional skills that will allow them to succeed when they get out. And the idea of building a relationship with somebody is really the way I was able to be successful. Because I had friends, I had community, I had support, I had family I could go home to, and so few people do. And if you really break down the core of it, I had opportunities because of the people that I knew. It was that simple. Now, I chose to take advantage of those opportunities, but I wouldn't have had them if I hadn't had support and if I hadn't had people in my life. So if we can create those opportunities for other people and create those relationships, and if somebody can have the opportunity to have a place to live when they get out, have a job, have a place they can go to school, have some kind of growth opportunity, yeah, not everybody's going to take it. We're not going to reduce the recidivism rate to zero, but we're going to have a lot more success stories because people actually have the option coming home. That's not, oh, I'm going to go live in the homeless shelter and try to work at McDonald's and probably get fired or probably not get hired in the first place. Like one of the guys that I consider a success story, we're having him speak at the juvenile center next month. And we just had him on this youth journalism program that I work with. He got turned down from Wendy's. He got turned down from McDonald's. Nobody in fast food would hire him because he had a criminal record.
Yeah.
And now he's the national director of community outreach for a huge nonprofit that does amazing work. The skill and the possibility was there, but nobody saw it. Nobody believed in him. What we want to do is find that skill and find that possibility in people and empower them to actually have that impact on the world.
Yeah. I love the story that I heard you tell on your TikTok, I believe it was, about how when you got out, you applied for a job and you listed all your jobs on your resume that you did in prison or your skills that you had. And they thought that you worked for the prison. And you're like, nope, I lived there. But you ended up getting that job.
I actually ended up turning that job down, bizarrely.
Oh, okay.
So there were a couple things that I realized while I was in prison, and guys used to make fun of me for it, is I didn't want to get out of prison look like someone who'd been in prison for 30 years or 20 years or 10 years. So I did my best to speak the way that I speak, or not dress the way that I dress because I didn't have an option in prison, but carry myself in a way that did not show that I'd spent that much time incarcerated. And again, at the time, people were like, yo, why are you trying to like be somebody else? Like, no, I'm trying to be somebody who's going to be successful. Like, you can be the king of this. Like, I want to be something in the world.
Yeah.
And that really benefited me because I would go into conversations or I would go into situations like this interview where in their mind, their stereotype or their prejudice immediately said, oh, this guy wasn't in prison. Like he must have been an employee. Whereas if someone had looked different or talked different or acted different, they would have been received in a different way. And that's one of the prejudices I'm trying to address. But it's at the same time, one of the things I'm trying to talk to the guys inside about, like, hey, you can't control all the prejudice. We're working on that. We're working on the narrative part, but you can control how you present to other people. And here are the things that you can do that will make a difference. It's not your responsibility. It's not fair, but these are the things you can do while we work on everybody else giving people the same chance.
Do you think that, like there's certain things in job interviews they can't ask you? They can't ask you as a woman. They can't ask me if I'm pregnant. They can't ask, many different things. Do you think that criminal record or criminal history should be one of those things that they shouldn't be able to ask about on job applications or job interviews?
I do. So I have mixed feelings about this because I think there's a practical side and there's a prejudicial side. And one of the reasons I get in trouble is that everybody's upset because I'm very much on the gray of the spectrum, not black and white. I think if somebody was convicted of molesting a child, they shouldn't be able to get a job at a daycare. If someone just got out of prison for embezzling funds, you should be able to know that before you hire them as an accountant. That being said, I don't think that someone's past should determine their eligibility for a job or for that interview. So I do think that I do support the programs where they talk about banning the box, which is essentially saying you at least get through the first round of interviews. No one can say, you're a felon, you have a criminal record. No, but they can ask you about that later in your time or on your second interview once you've established a rapport, because I think in some cases, at least, it is relevant. Now, once it's 5 years ago or 10 years ago and somebody's been out in the world and been successful, I do believe that should be no longer relevant. But if if I got out of prison 30 days ago and I'm, robbed, like pizza delivery man, and I want to go work right next to a pizza delivery place, like that might be a red flag.
Yeah, absolutely.
But again, we don't. That's one of the biggest problems that I have in the advocacy space is we don't have any nuanced responses. We either have people who are pro law and order, like stick them in prison for the rest of their lives, or people that have this kind of naivete was like, oh, everybody in prison's a really nice guy. They just need a chance. Like there's something in the middle that's really true because there are some people in prison that I don't feel comfortable having out as neighbors or as coworkers, but there are a lot of people that I do. And if we deal with that reality rather than the kind of black or white thinking, we'll actually have a lot more success.
I feel the same way. I get the same thing about police officers. Not every police officer is good. Not every police officer is bad. And then those groups of people are like, all cops are bad or all cops are angels and would never. I'm like, there's nuance to every people group, and prisoners are the same. There's some prisoners who you don't want around your kids, like, so I wouldn't invite over to dinner. You, however, are invited to dinner anytime you want to come.
Thank you.
What do you think about, one of the questions I was thinking about is, do you think that there's a different mindset of prisoners who have lost hope or think they're never getting out of prison? Like, let's say they have such a long sentence. Do they just give up on trying to be like, you had an end date in sight, even though it came a lot earlier than you thought? You knew you were getting out. I've seen it sometimes where people think they're never going to get out. They're going to die here, but then they do end up getting out. I guess institutionalization. It's a very difficult word to say. You know what I'm trying to say.
It's like Worcestershire sauce. It's not a real word.
Yeah. Do you think that when people get institutionalized, it affects them if they do end up getting out?
Yes, but there's a caveat. I do believe that people get institutionalized, but I've also seen that after a short period of time. I've seen that after 20 years or 30 years or 40 years. And especially the guys who've been locked up, even with the best of like treatment or intent or whatever, after 30 or 40 years, they've got some serious barriers to overcome.
Yeah.
Oddly, and I would never advocate for life sentences. I think they're a horrible thing. One of the weird byproducts is often the healthiest people I saw were those who had given up hope of getting out. Because what it did, and it actually kind of did the same thing for me. It wasn't that I'd given up hope of getting out, but it was so far in the future. I was an 18-year-old kid sentenced to 32 years in prison. I could not conceive of that amount of time.
Yeah.
So as I gave up hope of that being like in my future or in my immediate reality, I kind of resigned myself to making the best of where I was. Like, this is where I'm at. I remember saying to my dad, I don't even know where I got the phrase, but I said, this is my bed, or I've made my bed. Now I have to sleep in it. And like, how am I going to make the best of this situation? And that's what I saw a lot of lifers do. They became tutors, or they got jobs in the factory, or they became mentors, or they, in some cases, became like the leaders of gangs. But they
Yeah.
looked for a position where they could have an impact. It's like everybody's looking for a meaningful connection and to have an impact on other people. And sometimes that comes out in really healthy ways, sometimes in really unhealthy ways. But quite often it comes out in meaningful ways when the hope of something different, or the kind of buffet mentality, or the waiting for this to happen goes away, and people instead just throw themselves into where they are.
Yeah. I want to talk about Greg because that's so interesting. Did you just roll your eyes at me? It's so interesting to me that you could be living with somebody and not realize. Let me play a little. I'm going to play a little clip of one of your TikToks for the people real quick. Yeah, here we go. So you lived with a serial killer.
I did.
And I'm going to play this first one, I think.
Greg was my prison roommate who was connected to a dozen murders across the country, but I didn't know that at first. So finding out one day that I was living with a serial killer was uncomfortable, and it didn't really mesh with the things I knew about him. He'd been a decorated officer in Vietnam, he'd served 3 tours, and used to recite the names of every soldier he had lost. The man was helping me work on my vocabulary. We used to play Jeopardy at night. Hell, he's the one who taught me how to shave because I hadn't been able to grow a beard before prison. He was really where I started to understand that no one is just one thing. Greg was my prison roommate.
That was so interesting to me because of the military connection and the serial killer connection. And my husband was a Marine, is always a Marine, I guess. I'm not allowed to say was a Marine, but he was in the military for 8 years and then worked for the Department of Defense after that. So the military connection was interesting to me because that is like a family. What I imagine being in prison is like those people become your family. And I have a true crime channel, so I'm very interested in serial killers too. So were you kind of freaked out when you found out that you were living with a serial killer?
Very much so.
Yeah.
So I went in right at the tail end of kind of the old ideology of the system of Virginia, which was you don't ask somebody their crime, you don't ask them your business, you don't tell them yours. It's kind of a don't ask, don't tell.
Okay.
So I didn't know the vast majority of people's crimes. I didn't know their histories. I didn't have any idea. And he was this nice little old man. When I got a job in the wood shop, they moved me in a cell, and I was excited because it wasn't some 18-year-old kid who was going to be loud and crazy. And I was 19 at the time, so it wasn't like I was mature. But I knew at that point I was looking for someone older, looking for something more comfortable, something calmer, because I had left the cell with somebody who was carrying a knife and selling drugs and in craziness. And I was like, yeah, I'm good. Like, I don't really want that.
Yeah.
And I just got to know him as he was. I mean, he worked in the quality control department there. He, was a really nice guy. He smoked a cigarette, he drank his coffee, he watched his TV, and that was it.
Yeah.
And it was only after I had tried to connect him with my stepmother, because I felt bad because he never got a visit. He never got a letter. And he was never on the phone, that she did some background and told me what had happened or what he had done. And then, I was terrified. At the same time, it's such a pivotal thing. And it's interesting. I was talking to somebody about this today. In his case, it's so extreme. This very nice avuncular man who taught me things and was kind has done these absolutely horrendous things. And it's impossible to not see that he is a contradiction, that he is a combination of things, that no one is just one thing. But I've struggled to apply that same lesson to myself or to people in my family or to people that I know. I still keep that kind of black and white thinking, except in those absolute extremes where I don't have a choice but to be like, hey, this does not compute. Like, clearly something's wrong here.
Yeah.
And it was uncomfortable, but at the same time, he had a really positive effect on my life, as strange as that sounds.
Well, just so you know, I've looked into this a little bit, Jesse, and most serial killers, their neighbors or their bunkmates or whoever will say, they're just a normal guy. I cannot believe when it comes out that they were a serial killer. They're like, he was so nice. He'd give you the shirt off of his back. So that story really resonated with me just from I've looked into, done deep dive research on different serial killers. And it seemed so real just to have this person in your life that you just think is just a nice old guy, don't know what he did, whatever, and helping you. Almost, it sounds like a father or an uncle figure, like helping you as a younger man, and then find out that he did all that stuff. Do you think that if he ever got out of prison, he would go back to that, or do you think that he was able to be reformed?
I don't know. So the biggest thing for me about him was that he was never accountable. And I think that for healing and change to happen, accountability is the first step, like in every situation. And when I asked him about it, like after I found out and after we had the really awkward conversation, He would kind of brag in a passive way, like none of those things were true, but if they were, I might have beaten a lie detector test. And there was this ego behind it that was so profoundly unhealthy, and that was where I started seeing it. It was that, and there was one time in particular that really sticks out. He spilled his coffee. Like I said, he would always just sit in front of his TV with his legs crossed and drink his coffee and smoke his cigarette. And he spilled his coffee and he just started screaming at himself, like, stupid, like so out of character for this quiet old man. And it was terrifying because it was like he went into this enraged state. And that was when I saw, like, oh, there's something there that I haven't seen. Like, there is a layer that is clearly capable of violence and clearly capable of something and clearly based in a great trauma. And that was when I realized, like, I don't know the whole picture. Like, I'm just looking at the kind of flat surface of the lake and not all the things underneath. So I can't say, because I never really got to see or experience, other than that one incident, the whole of who he was. But as far as I know, he died in prison. I actually had a weird recent experience where I thought he had died back in like 2005 or 2006 because somebody had told me that. And I recently had somebody who worked in the Department of Corrections reach out and said, no, he was still in hospice in 2013 or 2014 when I left. And he was basically comatose, but I used to look in his eyes and it terrified me. I was like, oh my God, like, is he alive all that time? It made me realize it's a situation where I have no idea. And all I can base it on is that limited experience. And from what I know, I would not encourage them to let him go. Like, even if he is comatose, like, probably not the best idea. This is the beginning of a Michael Myers movie, but for those who are accountable and those who do the work to change, I do genuinely believe that the vast majority of people can change. There may be extremes, and he may well have been one of those extremes.
Yeah. Well, I'm kind of glad that he never got out as well. Just, not that I live near where you were in prison, but if I did, I would not want him like you were let out in an hour and a half, him just being let out in an hour and a half and then being to his own devices, because it's just, I got goosebumps just thinking about it. Let's see. I had other questions. By the way, anybody watching right now, if you have questions for Jesse, put them in the chat, and we're going to be here a little bit longer, but put the questions in the chat and I will ask him at the end. Actually, while we're stopped for a second, I'm so bad at this thing that I'm doing. But if you want to make a donation, YouTube does not like my content. So you have to do the buy me a coffee thing. I put the little QR code up there. I'll pop it at the bottom too. If you want to buy Zena a milk bone. By the way, Zena is here. If you want to buy her a milk bone, let me put her on screen so I can prove that she's here waiting. She hears me talking about her and her tail was wagging. Zena, do you want a milk bone? Yes. So if you make a donation while we're on air, I will give Zena a milk bone. She's waiting patiently, guys. She likes the milk bones. I got the milk bones right here. And I do have a merch store now. So if you want something that says Overruled with Katie Zed, you can definitely do that. We have coffee mugs. We have t-shirts, all of the things. The links are down in the description. You can also find all of Jesse's links down in the description as well. I highly suggest checking out his the charity stuff and making a donation, even if it's a couple of dollars. Definitely do that. It's a really good cause. And I might actually leave that link in my descriptions all the time. I really feel that strongly about it. So, all right. I got to do that at least once a show. It always feels so awkward. But so when you were I was talking to my friend Justin, and like I told you before, he watched some of your content, and we were texting back and forth as he was looking at your stuff. And one of the things he said is, you were a store man. And I said, so you want me to ask him if he ran a store? And he's like, that's not a question. He did. And he said, it's because of your, hold on, I made notes, your tone and inflection. You used your words and your quick wits. You were not a punk I should have had the text pulled up. It was a hilarious conversation, by the way. Did you run a store when you were in prison?
Briefly. Though
okay.
That was before I learned to use my words effectively.
Okay.
So I think he's half right. Where I was at, it was not a good idea as a 19 or 20-year-old kid to run a store box, because it wasn't really on violence or even the threat of violence. It was on respect. Like, you may have had to do violent things in the past, but really all you had to have done is resolve situations. But I was so young and scared and hot-blooded that was not my approach. And I got into a situation where somebody didn't pay me on store day. I got kind of upset, and I didn't actually address them directly. I went to somebody else and I was like, hey, what should I do? And the guy was like, hey, you got to mess him up. Like, he did something wrong. So I'm trying to kind of like build myself up. And what happened is somebody had gone back to him. So we got into a fight. I ended up getting locked up because we were fighting in my cell. He managed to get out. I go back and I basically lost most of the store. Now, a lot of the guys paid me, the older heads who liked me, just kind of out of respect, but I didn't get the stuff from him. And that's when I realized, like, this is not a good plan.
Yeah.
This is something that appears to be enriching me in the moment. But again, I'm trying to look toward the future. Is this going to help me get out of prison or help me when I get out of prison? Or is this going to get me a bunch of honey buns and cookies and stupid crap? And so then every hustle I did from then on out was focused on how can I get the maximum return with the minimal risk? So I helped my buddy run a parlay, or I made apple pies, or I sold cable cords. I did things that were practical and reasonable, but wouldn't put me in a great deal of trouble. I wouldn't have to worry about somebody owing me money. And I also changed my attitude about that. And it was actually this one guy, one of the scariest people I've ever met. And I remember somebody didn't pay him one time and the whole pod got quiet. And everybody's like, oh my God, he's going to murder him. He's going to stab him in the neck. And he walked over and he said, look, bro, it's okay. Don't even worry about it. And he was so calm and so nice. The guy got so scared, he literally went and borrowed the money to pay him back. And I asked him later, I was like, were you going to mess him up? Like, what was that, a throw-off tactic? He's like, no, like, it's not worth it to me. I don't care. He said, why am I going to hurt somebody over a few dollars? Like, that's not worth it to me. I'm going to go shake his hand. I'm going to be his friend. I'm going to make him feel as guilty as possible because you know what? Maybe one day he'll be a better person.
Yeah.
And for the scariest person I had ever seen to say that just shocked me. But it really let me know that maturity and strength in prison is not always punching first or stabbing first. It's sometimes just actually being the bigger, more mature person.
Awesome. I'm going to throw some of these questions up here that people have.
Sure.
Speaking of Justin, he asked, how did you get past being institutionalized after coming home, if you ever did?
I think because I always had my eye on the future, because I always had my eye on how I was going to live when I got out, to some degree, I avoided some of the traps of institutionalization. I didn't get stuck in the role or the identity of an incarcerated person or the role or identity of feeling like what I was doing in there was significant, because some guys love being the biggest store guy or being the gang leader, or being the whatever, and that becomes their whole identity. For me, I wanted to be curious. I wanted to learn. I wanted to help other people. I wanted to be a mentor. Those translated really well to the world. That being said, I was not ready for the choice paralysis of walking into a store and having to choose between 27 body washes. And I had panic attacks. I was not ready to walk into Costco. I was not ready to walk into crowded spaces where people casually bump into you and say things that are really slick out the side of their mouth. And so there was a period of getting over it. And one of the biggest blessings that I had was I had a former civil rights attorney who I had actually done some work for while I was incarcerated, who had worked to improve conditions while I was in. And he was selling his house and he said, hey, I need to do some improvements. I need to fix these decks and fix these stairs. And so I got to get out of prison and within a week, spend 2 weeks out in the woods doing carpentry by myself, like breathing in the air, walking down by his lake, like feeling like a human being. And the decompression of those 2 weeks, being able to spend that time alone in nature, was the most healing thing I could have imagined. If I had to go straight from where I was to working in McDonald's or working in a factory or working in a place that was hectic and crazy, I feel like the PTSD never would have resided. Like I would have been living in that fight or flight state constantly. But that 2 weeks really kind of gave me the first leg of the journey of kind of healing and moving forward.
Awesome. I love that. And I imagine after seeing concrete and steel for so long, being in the forest must have been just amazing. Life to the Max asks, who was your greatest advocate while you were in prison?
I think probably my mother.
Okay.
I had a lot of people, people impacted my life in different ways. My grandfather just died this past year, and it's the best human being I've ever met in my life, in part because he was not biologically my grandfather, and it didn't matter. As a matter of fact, when we stood up at his funeral, there were 3 grandchildren, and none of us belonged to him biologically. But he loved us more than anybody had ever loved us in our lives, because that's who he was. So I think in some ways he did that. But on the advocacy side, it was my mother. Like she made sure people wrote me. When I filed my petition for clemency, I was just going to file it and be done. I was like, okay, it's never going to work. I just want to do it and know that I've done my part to try to get out. And then I can deal with the circumstances or deal with the conditions where I'm at, because I've done my best. But she insisted on getting letters of support. She insisted on making a website. She insisted on turning it into a whole affair, which directly led to me being granted a conditional pardon. So she was tireless in her efforts to get me out of prison.
That's amazing. I love moms. I love moms so much. All moms. How do you make apple pie in prison?
So that was, I had a buddy who he's one of the craziest stories. I mean, he's like a walking highlight reel. He had tried to escape from one prison, been sent up to the Supermax, tried to escape from the Supermax, like broke his leg, was left in chains naked in the hole for a day, like just horrible. But he had learned resiliency because he didn't have anybody. Nobody was sending him money. Nobody was helping him out. He was in the worst prison in Virginia, and he found a way to survive. And so sometimes he ran a gambling ring. Sometimes he ran something else. And so we were sitting in the cell one day. He had moved in the cell with me when my cell partner got locked up. And he said, man, I got an idea. We're going to make apple pies. And to me, it was the dumbest thing I'd ever heard. Like, who's going to buy an apple pie? Like, how are we going to do this? So we then had to go to the chow hall. And this is how good of a salesperson he was. We had to convince people to give us their apples and give us their cake and give us their butter. And then we basically made an apple pie out of that and sold it back to them, which just shouldn't work. But sure enough, he goes over there and he gets 30 cakes and 30 apples and 30 scoops of butter. We go back, we take cookies. They had like duplex or like Oreo cookies, but very off-brand Oreo cookies. We'd use that with the cake to make a dough. And then we'd make the little tray, the like kind of microwave tray they would come in. We would cook the apples in the butter with either fireballs, or we'd get cinnamon stolen from the kitchen, or, sugar packets. We would cook them with that and then make a little apple pie. And damned if people didn't pay us for the same thing they'd given us for free earlier in the chow hall.
That's amazing. And the person who asked the question also said that's amazing. I didn't know that was a real question that would have a real answer. I love that.
Yeah.
Do you still associate with the guys you knew in jail, like visitations and things like that, or phone calls, anything like that?
So that's actually kind of a complicated question. So it's very easy for me to stay in touch with the guys that I bonded with who are now out. I have friends that until my motorcycle accident, that I rode motorcycles with. I've got a guy down in Florida who's moving back up. I see him every time he comes into town. We've got other people I see when I go, take a vacation or do a work trip to their city. It's gotten harder and harder to be in contact with guys on the inside. I still accept that call when it comes in, but man, does it like trigger everything inside of me that screams to run away. I still respond to those letters. I still help connect guys with services. It's not comfortable though. It's, I had a lot of guys where I was in, you develop this really strong friendship, and then they get out and you might get one email or two emails or a couple pictures, but then that's it. And I never understood. And one guy, I'm really actually grateful. He was a lifer who got out after 31 years. He sent me one email and that was it. And he said, Jesse, I don't know how to tell you this any other way than it felt like I woke up from a bad dream and I was finally back where I was supposed to be. That was the last time I heard of him. Now, once I got out, we've gone and gotten lunch and hung out and done stuff together, but he just couldn't bridge that gap between the dream that he was living in prison and the reality out in the world. And I feel that. Like, I feel a sense of survivor's guilt and a sense of duty and a sense of desire to connect with people, but it's not really pleasant. Like when my buddy calls and he's dealing with those same things I was struggling with, it's really hard.
Are there terms to or are there conditions to your release to where you, I guess, sorry, I'm not good at this. But with your charity, you are helping people who are getting out of prison. Are you allowed to speak to, or are you allowed to have communication? And like, I know a lot of times terms of release, you can't be hanging out with other criminals. Is that an issue with your charity?
Yes, but not where I am. I got really lucky. So in Virginia, there are no terms. The terms of my release, my conditional pardon, essentially said that, hey, you're not innocent, you're guilty, and we're not like leaving you alone, but we are going to commute the rest of your sentence. As long as you spend 3 years under probation parole, you will be done with your sentence.
Okay.
But the terms of that are very standard. And in Virginia, one of the terms is not that you cannot associate with a formerly incarcerated person or a convicted felon. Thankfully, in some places, like we had a guy who got out, was here, but he was from Boston. He'd just literally come down here to do a drug deal, had gotten arrested, and was trying to go back home. And when he got back home, they were like, oh, you need to be in the house by 6:30. You can't talk to half your family. You need to have a job, but also you can't have a job in any one of these. Like, they made it impossible for him to live. So he put an emergency transfer back down, moved in with a guy he had been in prison with. And down here, they were like, all right, cool, check in once a month. Like, have a good life. If you need help, let us know. And so the way things are different depending on state or even city, it's just insane.
It seems like it makes it a lot easier to build a life outside. Like if all you've known for, in your case, 19 years or some cases 30 years are people that have been incarcerated with you, it makes it easier to start a life if you can get a helping hand, somebody reaching down to help you up that you knew from prison,
I think that's a mix because I think it depends on who someone associates with in prison. Because there were guys in there who were fighting and getting high and stealing and doing stuff to their final day. And there were guys who were building a future and building a life and building skills and working to help other people. And both those groups of people were there when you get out. There's one who's there to hand you a gun and hand you a bag of drugs. There's another one there to say, hey, here's a place to live. Here's a job. Here's some help. And it just depended on who you were associating with. So I understand the idea or the fear behind the prohibition, but I think it's incredibly problematic.
Okay. Let's see what this one says. Are you a Christian or religious? And did you see God at work when you were in prison?
I'm not. If I was anything, I was like a nominal Buddhist.
Okay.
So I had the kind of Christian experience I had was there was a group called Kairos that I think is absolutely incredible, and I would encourage anybody to support. They are a non-denominational Christian group that comes in to essentially talk to people, and sometimes it's like a therapeutic journey, sometimes it's to convert people. But they bring people in, and they tend to have some really important healing conversations about accountability, but also about trauma. Just basic ideas like, hey, if you grew up in a really tough environment and all you ever saw was violence, it's understandable that you would be violent. That doesn't have to be who you are moving forward. But it was really, for me, it was really the introduction of meditation. And it was a young, crazy, weird, homeless Buddhist guy that I met that shifted my perspective and shifted my daily practice toward one of being present and being grateful and being connected. And that was really the moment or the shifting time that kind of got me to where I am.
Okay. We have to give Zena some milk bones, and then we'll ask you if you have any closing, anything
I
like
can't wait
that.
to see Zena. This is going to be great. How do you get her to stay there the whole time? Have you trained her for years?
She's just lazy, you know. All right, Zena, this is from Randy and from Colonel Angus.
Wow.
You get 3 milk bones. And Colonel Angus also bought something from my store, a t-shirt or something. So, all right, Zena, you got to do the tricks. Ready? Do you shake? Good girl. You're so good. You bump. Good girl. One more. All right. She's a very happy puppy. Very happy puppy. She's the best co-host. She doesn't do a lot of the work, but people come here just to see her. So I think half of the audience is just her fan and not mine.
I get it.
Let's see. Oh, so promote your work. Say anything you want to say right now. It's your time.
Sure. So, I started off telling my story and trying to tell the stories of other people on social media. So Second Chancer, I think you said you have the links in there.
Yeah.
If you're interested in those stories, I'm happy to keep sharing them. I'm happy to share success stories and advocate for policies that would make things better. And sometimes just have a laugh or have an experience, which I'm really grateful for. The nonprofit work I'm really proud of. It's one of the things in my life where I feel like I've been able to have an impact in a way that I never imagined I could. I'm really excited about like I said, we're doing a local fundraiser next month to launch this app to where we can actually connect people with professional mentors. I'm going to a tech convention tomorrow to lobby all these firms and all these businesses to give pro bono hours to teach entrepreneurship and financial literacy and essentially prepare people for the professional world. I'm really excited about where that's going, and we're hoping to do a national fundraising so we can expand this nationwide to go from a small pilot to an actual program that will be able to positively affect the lives of everyone who's willing to take advantage of it. And it's really neat that, starting on social media, I think one of the most important things we can do is change the narrative around people getting out of incarceration, just so that people are willing to see them in a light. There's a possibility of redemption or a possibility of giving them a second chance. But I think equally important is changing the narrative in the minds of the people who are incarcerated. Because when I go to the juvenile center, I see so many broken kids who see no hope for the future and see no hope for themselves. And I want to let them know, like, hey, there is a way forward and we will help you get there. Yeah. And so thankfully, there's a telecom provider who has some dubious practices, but the videos that I've done and the podcasts that I've done are available in 300 prisons nationwide. So I'm able to speak directly to the people that I'm trying to inspire, directly to the people that I'm trying to give a different perspective to. And that is just the most gratifying thing I could possibly imagine.
That's amazing. I'm so glad to hear that people are getting your message while they're like before they get out, so they know where to go, who to contact. Definitely, the link for the charity is in the description down below and everywhere we're streaming right now. So check that out. Please check that out and donate if you can. I would appreciate it. Jesse would appreciate it, and all of the people that he's helping will definitely appreciate it. I'd like to thank you for joining me today. Like I said at the beginning, I was stunned that you even emailed me back because I have such a small online presence. But if this message can get out to at least one person, I think the last hour will have been worth it.
Thank you very much.
All right. Have a good day.
You too.
Bye, guys.
First Florida man was hurting and dope is so dope. First Florida man. Looking for new thrills, needed a new track of land. I used to dig the Simpsons, man. Bumping Biggie Pop, Smash Mouth, and Simple Plan. No scrubs for the crease in my pimples, damn. From the south streets of southeast Michigan, hitting shuffle till I settled on a different jam. And when a dime won't do, a better nickel can. And let me tell you, when I used to dig them Simpsons, man. A funny thing about time, you can't get it back. A tight grip, but it rips the jacket. Slight lisp with a mix of traffic. You see about me, like Mr. Glass, always wished I was a whiz at graphics. Take me back to the past where the hits were massive. You could hear Gladys Knight and the Pips on plastic. Misfit molasses. Delete my contacts just so I can stick to glasses. Feel that skipped out, so I miss the classics. Aristotle of the bottle, Seneca of the simple action, senator of the simple maxim. I swear for a skillful Saxon, I'm still relaxing. Who wanna take a dip in the mind sauce, making up for the time lost, forgetting all my past was when I sign off. Prime bribe, prime rib, Agent Smith, prime boss, popping red pills till my mind's off, mind's off. First Florida man. First Florida man. Endo de Soto. First Florida man. First Florida man was Hernando de Soto. Won't you so loco? Show off your photos, throw out your Twinkies, throw up your ho-hos, tuck in them pinkies. Them shits a no-no. The first Florida man was Hernando de Soto. Brought to my attention by the man with the mojo. My 8th subscriber, Iyama Bagoso. Jump in them Sinkies and dump them mimosos. The first Florida man was Hernando de Soto. First Florida man was Hernando de Soto. First Florida man was Hernando de Soto. Threw up that blue pill, moved to a new track. I slew the foothills of that voodoo sap. Microfiche tape decks, I'll sift through that, cause I'll do anything to get the old Simpsons back. Give me the news that make my mood react. I'll swim through the sewer just to make it to the truth intact. And you can shine up that voodoo with new shellac. I'll still do anything to get the old Simpsons back. Imagine thinking Karl Marx is new school Klingon like Huzu. They welcome the ways they can bring on the boots, dude. Declare a major, they get paid to pollute you. Self-ashamed neighbors never gaze when they scoop you. I wonder how we fight it. The 6th step is never enter in my tent uninvited. The 5th step is produce, no skills is no use. 4th step community preference is unity. 3rd step is nation, it's somewhat location, mostly relations, that's the situation. Next step family, patriarchal sanity. Safe under the canopy, ain't a place for anarchy. 1st step I just got to say it, no showboat. Step back and